Exercise 36, Topic 1. Read a short passage and listen to a lecture on the same topic. Then listen for a question about them. After you hear the question, you have 30 seconds to prepare and 60 seconds to record your answer.
Now read the passage about color. You have 45 seconds to complete it. Please begin reading now. Now listen to a part of a lecture in an earth science class. The professor is talking about the color of the sky.
Let's look at a very practical application of the theory that you read about in the assignment. As you will recall, sunlight contains all of the colors, but when it is scattered, it is perceived by the human eye as having a specific color depending on the wavelength. Red light has the longest wavelength, for example, and blue light has about half that of red light. This difference in wavelength means that blue light will be scattered nearly 10 times more than red light. Even without all the smoke and dust in the atmosphere that would cause light to scatter, the oxygen and nitrogen molecules would still cause the scattering of light. When blue light waves try to go through the oxygen and nitrogen molecules, light is scattered in all directions. All of the other colors are scattered too, but the shorter the wavelength of the color, the more that color gets scattered by the atmosphere. So, blue light's short wavelength causes it to be scattered the most, and we see blue from all directions in the sky.
Referring to both the lecture and the reading passage, explain why the sky is blue.
Please prepare your answer after the beep. Please begin speaking after the beep. Example speaking answer.
Color travels in light waves that emanate from a light source. When light is scattered, as for example by a prism, white light is refracted into bands of color, and each has its individual wavelength. Blue light has a short wavelength as compared with, say, red light, which has the longest wavelength. The result is that blue light is scattered about 10 times more than red light. So in the sky, the sun is the light source. And when blue light waves go through the atmosphere, then oxygen and nitrogen molecules, or even smoke and dust particles, scatter the light in all directions. All of the colors are scattered, in fact, but because blue light has such a short wavelength, it gets scattered the most, and the human eye perceives the color blue from everywhere we look in the sky. That's why the sky's blue.
Exercise 36, Topic 2. Read a short passage and listen to a lecture on the same topic. Then listen for a question about them. After you hear the question, you have 30 seconds to prepare and 60 seconds to record your answer.
Now read the passage about polio. You have 45 seconds to complete it. Please begin reading now. Now listen to part of a lecture in a biology class. The professor is talking about polio.
Epidemics of poliomyelitis have been referred to as the plague of development. Ironically, major epidemics seem to occur after there's an improvement in sanitation. That's because when children are living in unsanitary conditions, such as a town with open sewage pipes, virtually all of them are exposed to the polio virus during infancy when the disease is least likely to cause symptoms. So the infants and small children who are exposed, well, they acquire a lifelong immunity to the disease, whereas older children or adults who become infected, they more often suffer paralysis or death. Okay, as a society improves its sanitation system, it's more probable that fewer babies will be exposed to the polio virus, and so, as they're exposed in later childhood, the disease begins to appear sporadically and spreads in the usual ways. Because the more wealthy members of society are the beneficiaries of all improvements, including sanitation, they're often the first victims of the polio epidemics. Of course, improvements may eliminate many other diseases. It's just that immunization for polio becomes more urgent in societies that have improved sanitation.
Referring to both the lecture and the reading passage, explain how polio is spread and why the more developed societies tend to suffer more serious epidemics.
Please prepare your answer after the beep. Please begin speaking after the beep. Example speaking answer.
Polio is spread by drinking water that's contaminated by the virus. This often happens when sewage, it pollutes the water supplies. The virus is swallowed in the water and passes into the digestive tract through the intestines and back into the sewage system where it repeats the cycle. In infants, the disease doesn't usually cause serious symptoms, but among older children and adults, polio can result in paralysis or death. So, the more developed societies tend to suffer epidemics because in communities without sewage treatment, babies are exposed to the polio virus early enough to acquire a lifelong immunity. But in wealthier communities with sanitation systems, well, fewer babies are exposed to the virus, and then if they are exposed when they are older, they suffer symptoms and contribute to an epidemic because the population isn't immune.
Exercise 37, Topic 1. Listen to a short conversation, then listen for a question about it. After you hear the question, you have 20 seconds to prepare and 60 seconds to record your answer.
Now listen to a conversation between two students.
How's the paper coming along?
Not very well.
Really? What's the problem?
Well, I can't possibly get it done by 10 o'clock tomorrow morning.
I see. Maybe I could help you. I'm a really fast typist.
Thanks. It's great of you to offer, but I don't know what I would ask you to do. I have the research done, and now I'm writing it on the computer. I'm composing everything on the screen, so...
I was thinking maybe you were writing it out on cards. Then I could have typed it for you while you were doing something else. You know, organizing the bibliography or something.
I wish. But I guess I'll just have to go it alone.
Well then, why don't you ask the professor for an extension?
I don't know. I thought about that, and he's really good about things like that, but it's so late now. I mean, it's the day before it's due.
I'd still try to talk with him if I were you. You don't have to ask for a week, just a couple of days. But listen, if you try to finish it instead, call me. Maybe there will be something I can do to help.
Describe the man's problem and the two suggestions that the woman makes about how to handle it. What do you think the man should do and why?
Please prepare your answer after the beep. Please begin speaking after the beep. Example speaking answer.
The man has a paper due the next morning, but he doesn't think he can complete it by the deadline. So the woman makes two suggestions. First, she offers to help him type the paper, but he's composing it on the computer, so then she encourages him to ask the professor for an extension. But the man is reluctant to do that because he feels it's too late to work it out with the professor. I think the man should try to talk with the professor, and he should ask for a few more days to finish the paper. He should be honest about it, and he should apologize for the late notice and accept responsibility. The truth is usually the best approach, in my opinion, and if the professor refuses, well, then the man can still work hard to finish on time.
Exercise 37, Topic 2. Listen to a short conversation, then listen for a question about it. After you hear the question, you have 20 seconds to prepare and 60 seconds to record your answer.
Now listen to a conversation between two students.
You don't know anyone who's looking for a roommate, do you?
Not really, but I thought you had a roommate.
I do. Or rather, I did. But she's getting married in the fall, so I have to find somebody else.
Okay, why don't you put an ad in the newspaper? The campus paper, I mean, not the city paper. Or better yet, you could sign up at the housing office. They post notices on a big bulletin board, and there are always people looking for roommates.
Yeah, I could do that. But I just keep hoping I'll find out that one of my friends is looking for a roommate. I'd rather live with someone I know.
I can understand that. Still, it's really expensive to keep an apartment on your own. I know. How about the dorm?
What?
Okay, it wouldn't be my first choice either, but it's inexpensive compared with an apartment, so you could save some money while you're there, and that way you could get a better apartment when you moved out. Besides, maybe you'll find someone you really want to share an apartment with who wants to move out of the dorm the next semester with you.
Describe the woman's problem and the 3 suggestions that the man makes about how to handle it. What do you think the woman should do and why?
Please prepare your answer after the beep. Please begin speaking after the beep. Example speaking answer.
Because the woman's roommate is getting married in the fall, she has to find another living situation. The man offers several suggestions. He mentions putting an ad in the school newspaper and posting a sign in the housing office. He also suggests that she could move into the dormitory to save money until she finds another roommate. Well, I think the woman should use all of the man's ideas. She should advertise for a roommate, but she should also make preliminary arrangements to live in the dorm if she isn't successful in locating someone she wants to share an apartment with. And if she's really lucky, she'll learn that one of her friends needs a roommate for the fall term, because that's what she'd really like to happen.
Exercise 38. Topic 1. Listen to a short conversation, then listen for a question about it. After you hear the question, you have 20 seconds to prepare and 60 seconds to record your answer.
Now listen to a conversation between two students.
It doesn't seem right that I have to take Earth Science 100.
Why not? I took it, and it's really an interesting course.
I know. It's just that I took so many science courses in high school, I don't think I'll learn anything new. But I have to take it because it's a prerequisite for Environmental Science 300, and that's a required course for my major. So you see my problem?
Well, let's think about this. If you take the prerequisite, you'll get credit for it, and the course will be an easy A, right?
I guess so.
Then if I were you, I'd just take Earth Science 100 as a sort of review. Then take Environmental Science 300 next semester. You could spend more time on your other classes.
Yeah, I could do that.
Or you could talk to the professor, the environmental science professor, I mean. You could just ask for an exception to the prerequisite. Tell him you'll take a test or something to prove that you already know the material.
Could the professor do that?
Absolutely. It's his class, and he can allow anyone he wants to in it.
Describe the woman's problem and the two suggestions that the man makes about how to handle it. What do you think the woman should do and why?
Please prepare your answer after the beep. Please begin speaking after the beep. Example speaking answer.
The woman has a lot of background in earth science from high school courses, but she's being required to take an introductory earth science course as a prerequisite for an environmental science course that's on her major program plan. The man suggests that she take the earth science anyway because it'll be easy and she'll probably get an A in it. He points out that she can spend more time on other courses because she won't need to spend much time on the earth science. But when she seems reluctant to do that, he recommends that she speak with the professor to request special permission to take Environmental Science 300 without the prerequisite. She already understands the material, so he tells her that she could offer to take a test. I think the woman should speak with the professor because if she gets permission, then she can take another course that will teach her something new instead of spending time and money on reviewing material she already knows.
Exercise 38, Topic 2. Listen to a short conversation. Then listen for a question about it. After you hear the question, you have 20 seconds to prepare and 60 seconds to record your answer.
Now listen to a conversation between two students.
We have to make a group presentation in my economics class, and you know how I feel about standing up in front of a group.
Yeah, I know. You always do a great job, though.
Thanks, but I get so stressed out.
Well, have you tried relaxation techniques, like deep breathing or closing your eyes and visualizing success? I used to go through my entire presentation in my head, and I even tried to imagine everyone applauding at the end.
Oh, I don't know. I don't think I'd be very good at that. Maybe the deep breathing, though.
Okay, then. You could just avoid being the presenter.
That sounds good. How do I do that?
Easy. Just offer to do the preparation. You know, like the handouts and overheads. In an economics presentation, you must have at least one chart to present.
Actually, we have 4 of them.
You see? Then let someone else do the talking. There's got to be someone in your group who enjoys being up front and center. Just so the professor knows that you did your part, and you can take care of that by handing in a list of the presenters and their responsibilities.
Describe the man's problem and the two suggestions that the woman makes about how to handle it. What do you think the man should do and why?
Please prepare your answer after the beep. Please begin speaking after the beep. Example speaking answer.
The man's problem is that he's concerned about making a presentation in his economics class because of his fear of speaking in front of a group. One suggestion that the woman makes is for the man to try relaxation techniques like visualization and deep breathing before he makes the presentation. Another suggestion is to take responsibility for preparing the visual materials like handouts, charts, and overheads, and then ask another group member to speak in front of the class. But she tells him to be certain that the professor knows he's done his share of the work by including the names of the group members and their responsibilities as part of the material they submit. Well, I think that the man should try to overcome his problem by taking the opportunity to do some of the presenting in the class. By avoiding it, he isn't making much progress.
Exercise 39, Topic 1. Listen to part of a lecture. Then listen for a question about it. After you hear the question, you have 20 seconds to prepare and 60 seconds to record your answer.
Now listen to part of a lecture in a botany class. The professor is discussing flowering plants.
Flowering plants have traditionally been divided into two major classes, dicots and monocots. The actual basis for the distinction is the number of cotyledons. Remember, cotyledons are the seed leaves that the embryo produces. In monocots, there is a single seed leaf, and in dicots, there are two seed leaves. Although there are a number of other characteristics that distinguish them, two are particularly useful. The number of flower parts and the leaf vein patterns are different in the two classes. The petals of the flowers, or other flower parts, are divisible by 3 in monocots, whereas they are divisible by 4 or 5 in dicots. And a parallel leaf structure is usual in monocots, but dicots tend to have numerous auxiliary veins that connect the major veining. That seems relatively straightforward then, right? Wrong. Botanists are not always in agreement regarding several families of flowering plants because they have a combination of characteristics that don't fit neatly into the classifications. For example, water lilies have leaf veining like dicots, but it appears that there is only a single seed leaf, as would be expected in a monocot. So how can this happen? Well, we believe that the two groups may actually have a shared ancestor, a basic group probably more similar to the dicots, from which the monocots have evolved. This means that no one characteristic of a flowering plant, the number of flower parts, leaf veining, or even the number of seed leaves, is going to be sufficient to identify it as either a monocot or a dicot.
Referring to the main points and examples from the lecture, describe the two general groups of flowering plants. Then explain the problem for classification that the professor presents.
Please prepare your answer after the beep. Please begin speaking after the beep. Example speaking answer.
Dicots and monocots are the two major classes of flowering plants. Basically, a monocot has one seed leaf and a dicot has two. In monocots, the number of petals can be divided evenly by 3, but in dicots, the number can be divided evenly by 4 or 5. Also, monocots have parallel veins in their leaves, but dicots have, numerous veins with connecting patterns. Now, the problem in classification is that sometimes the characteristics overlap. The professor's example is the water lily, which has characteristics from both the monocot and the dicot. The professor explains that the two classifications may have descended from a common ancestor, and that makes classification of a plant on the basis of any one characteristic. That one characteristic is insufficient to identify it as either a monocot or a dicot.
Exercise 39, Topic 2. Listen to part of a lecture, then listen for a question about it. After you hear the question, you have 20 seconds to prepare and 60 seconds to record your answer.
Now listen to part of a lecture in an engineering class. The professor is discussing bridge construction.
Okay, let's talk about bridge construction, specifically arch bridges and suspension bridges. Arch bridges have been a standard for bridge construction since ancient times because they are very stable structures. In an arch, the force of the load is carried outward from the top to the ends of the arch, where abutments prevent the ends from pulling apart. So you see, an arch bridge can be designed so that no part of it has to withstand tension. Another advantage of arch bridges is the fact that they can be constructed from such a wide variety of materials, including stone, brick, timber, cast iron, steel, or reinforced concrete. It's also adaptable. The deck can be propped above the arch or hung below the arch. One major disadvantage of the arch bridge, though, the bridge is completely unstable until the two spans meet in the middle. So that can make an arch bridge a little tricky to build. Now, a suspension bridge consists of a deck suspended from cables. The two largest cables, or main cables, are hung from towers with the cable ends buried in huge concrete blocks or rock called anchorages. The cables support the weight of the bridge and transfer the load to the anchorages and the towers. Suspension bridges are considered aesthetically beautiful, and because they are relatively light and strong, they can be used for the longest spans. The cables, usually of high tensile wire, can support an immense weight, but the design does have the disadvantage of potential bending in the roadway. And because suspension bridges are light and flexible, wind is always a serious concern.
Referring to the main points and examples from the lecture, Describe the two types of bridge construction presented by the professor. Then explain the specific advantages and disadvantages of each type.
Please prepare your answer after the beep. Please begin speaking after the beep. Example speaking answer.
The professor describes two types of bridges, the arch bridge and the suspension bridge. Arch bridges are very stable because the weight is distributed from the top to the ends of the arch where abutments keep the ends from separating. In addition to stability, an advantage of arch bridges is that they can be constructed from many different materials, like wood, steel, stone, brick, or concrete. The problem is that an arch is difficult to build because it's unstable until the middle span is complete. Now, suspension bridges, they have a deck suspended from cables that are hung from towers. So the cables support the weight and distribute the load to anchorages of concrete or rock and to the towers as well. Suspension bridges are beautiful, and they're light and strong, which makes them appropriate choices for the longest spans. The problem is that the deck of a suspension bridge may bend, and they're not appropriate for very windy areas.
Exercise 40, Topic 1. Listen to part of a lecture. Then listen for a question about it. After you hear the question, you have 20 seconds to prepare and 60 seconds to record your answer.
Now listen to part of a lecture in an anatomy class. The professor is discussing the functions of the liver.
So that brings us to our discussion of the liver, the largest internal organ in the human body. As you already know, it's part of the digestive system, and it performs more than 500 functions. Today we'll talk about the three primary functions of the liver. First, the liver functions as a storage system. The liver stores energy in the form of glycogen, which is made from a type of sugar called glucose. When the glucose levels in the blood are high, the liver uses the glucose to create glycogen and stores it as energy that can be used later. When the glucose level in the blood falls below the minimum level, the liver changes glycogen into glucose for energy. The liver also stores essential vitamins such as A, D, K, and the B vitamins, all of which are critical to maintain good health. In addition to storing energy and vitamins, the liver produces essential chemicals, including important proteins like albumin, which retains calcium and regulates the movement of water from the bloodstream to the tissues, and globin, which is key to maintaining the immune system, and cholesterol, an important part of the cell membrane which is used to transport fats in the blood to tissues in the body. All right, the last crucial function of the liver is to help eliminate toxic substances such as alcohol and drugs from the bloodstream. To clear these harmful substances, the liver absorbs them, then chemically alters them, and finally excretes them into bile. and the bile works its way out of the system through the small intestine of the digestive tract.
Referring to the main points and examples from the lecture, describe the three basic functions of the liver presented by the professor.
Please prepare your answer after the beep. Please begin speaking after the beep. Example speaking answer.
The liver has more than 500 functions, but the professor concentrates on three. First, the liver is used as a storage system. The liver regulates the glucose levels in the blood, and when it's too high, the liver converts glucose into glycogen and stores it as energy for later use. When the glucose level's too low, it changes the glycogen back into glucose for energy. The liver also stores vitamins A, B, D, and K. Second, the liver is a chemical system. It produces essential proteins, proteins that transport water and fats from the blood to tissues in the body. And they also support the immune system. Third, the liver eliminates toxic material from the blood. For example, drugs and alcohol. The liver absorbs them and changes their chemical composition and excretes them into bile that gets eliminated through the small intestine.
Exercise 40, Topic 2. Listen to part of a lecture, then listen for a question about it. After you hear the question, you have 20 seconds to prepare and 60 seconds to record your answer.
Now listen to part of a lecture in a psychology class. The professor is discussing how behavior can be predicted.
In addition to describing behavior, psychologists try to predict future performance. We do this by designing studies that determine relationships between the behavior that we expect with the behavior that we can actually record. We use a statistical measurement called a correlation to tell us whether two variables, like perhaps two test scores, whether they vary together in the same way. For example, studies have shown a positive correlation between a student's performance on the SAT, that's the Scholastic Aptitude Test, and the same student's performance in college courses. It's a positive correlation because the higher the score on the SAT, the better we can expect the college grades to be. But what about a negative correlation? Well, other studies suggest that getting a lot of sleep the night before taking the SAT will result in fewer errors on the verbal section. So in a negative correlation like that, the variables move in the opposite direction. The more hours sleep, the fewer verbal errors. Now, that's all well and good, but the problem occurs when we try to understand why correlations exist. That gets us into causality. You see, there are so many potentially uncontrolled or unknown factors that the two variables we are studying may appear to be connected, but they may both be responding to a common third variable. Let's go back to the SAT verbal example. What if the students who slept well the night before the SAT were all very intelligent, or were more prepared for the verbal section, or by chance many words that they already knew showed up on the exam? Then the real cause wouldn't be the sleep at all.
Referring to the main points and examples from the lecture, describe 2 types of research correlations that the professor presents. Then explain causality.
Please prepare your answer after the beep. Please begin speaking after the beep. Example speaking answer.
A correlation indicates whether 2 variables correspond. I mean, whether they vary in the same way. The professor uses the example of students' scores on the SAT and their performances in college to demonstrate a positive correlation. If a student has a high SAT score, we can expect good grades in college. The variables move in the same direction. The professor uses the example of getting a good night's sleep before taking the SAT and the number of incorrect answers on the verbal section. That's an example of a negative correlation. If a student gets a good night's sleep, we can expect fewer errors. The variables move in opposite directions. But even when a correlation can be shown, we don't know the cause. The 2 variables could be affected by a third factor they have in common. As an example, the students in the study might be more prepared for the verbal section and would have performed well whether they were rested or not.
This is the end of the speaking exercises. Remember, you are improving your English. Continue to work toward your goal.